What if tomorrow the war could be over? Isn't that worth fighting for? Isn't that worth dying for?
Yours truly, Brevin Thompson, is back to talk about The Matrix Reloaded, directed once again by the Wachowskis, and with most of the original cast coming back. A lot of people back then, back in 2003, were so hyped for this film because The Matrix back then in 1999 was so fucking good, and a lot of people were mostly becoming obsessed with the first film. So, of course, sequels were inevitable, and a lot of people were, like, so hyped, and they had so much anticipation for The Matrix Reloaded, as well as The Matrix Revolutions, because both of these films were shot back-to-back, which was kind of like taking cues on what Peter Jackson was doing back then with the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which was kind of uncommon even around that time, and this, a good example of this, it originally occurred in the late 70s with Richard Donner shooting Superman and Superman 2, but never had the chance to finish his version of the sequel. But thankfully, we did get his version of Superman 2 in the late 2000s, which I'm really happy with. But in terms of The Matrix Reloaded, I would say it's definitely a mixed bag for me, as it is for a lot of fans. Well, there are some things to love in The Matrix Reloaded, and I will talk about that, but before I discuss more about my thoughts on the film, I do have a good friend who is collaborating with me on these movies, and that is, of course, RyanCam. I'm really happy to have him back on this channel to talk about The Matrix Reloaded. But before I discuss my thoughts on The Matrix Reloaded, now it's on to you, Ryan.
Hello everyone, my name is RyanCam. I want to thank Brevin for having me back on his channel. Last time I was here, we talked about Skyfall. However, this time I'm back to continue our combined reviews of the Matrix trilogy. We talked about the original The Matrix, and now it's time to talk about The Matrix Reloaded. This was once again directed by the Wachowskis, and this is the sequel to The Matrix, which was an incredible success. This is my first time seeing The Matrix Reloaded. However, throughout my entire life, I had heard nothing but one narrative. The Matrix Reloaded is one of the most disappointing movies of all time. The Matrix, the first one, was so good that Reloaded was just like a punch to the gut. Like, it was like in the basement. Like, it was that bad. Now, I had always meant to see this movie, however, I had been drawn to especially watching the sequels in honor of Resurrections coming out this December. However, Brevin got in touch with me to review these movies, and so that gave me an excuse to need to watch them. And so, now having seen The Matrix Reloaded, going in there with an open mind, well, I can safely say that this movie is a mixed bag. I'm of two minds on this. On one mind, this movie is not as bad as I've heard other reviews say it is. However, in terms of The Matrix versus The Matrix Reloaded, it is a massive downgrade. Now, The Matrix Reloaded was already at a handicap because of just the quality of the original Matrix. However, Reloaded takes a definite step down in certain areas, and it shows. In the spirit of me being an optimist, I do want to talk about the stuff that I liked first, and chief among them being the action, because say what you will about the Wachowskis, but they know how to film them some action. In my research, I found that the now famous highway scene was built on an actual highway. They built it on an Air Force base with old runways and designs to make it look like a functioning highway, but when you look at that scene and you recognize that that took place on even a mock highway, on a real road with real traffic and just real cars and the actors, with CG of course, actors doing real stunts, it's kind of beautiful. Because if this were made today, it would definitely be made with heavy amounts of CGI. But the fact that they built the runway and actually used it, it just shows that there was 1,000 times more thought and effort put forth into this movie than a lot of other similar movies. and it was nice to see. There's definitely some very noticeable CGI in this movie. There was noticeable CGI in The Matrix, however, it's not really great in Reloaded, especially one scene where Neo fights off a horde of Agent Smiths, and the Smiths kind of look like wacky waving arm flailing tube men. It's kind of it's not great. However, the thought and the effort is definitely present here, and I have nothing but respect for that. Also, the acting, for the most part, is still pretty good. I can't hate on my man Keanu Reeves. He still does a pretty good job as Neo. Kristen Scott Thomas is still really good as Trinity, and I can't legitimately hate any movie with Laurence Fishburne in it. The man can do no wrong. When the movie focuses on any one of those three, it's actually good. And I guess that's where I gotta go into what I didn't like about the movie, which is a lot of bells and whistles and empty calories in the movie that I didn't really think needed to be there. I don't think this is a big spoiler, but essentially, in this movie we see the human city of Zion for the first time, the much ballyhooed last human city from the first movie. And it looks like what you would imagine a city in this world might look like. However, there are several subplots that are introduced and side characters that I just was not a fan of. Like, for example, there is a subplot between Morpheus, the commander of the human army, and this one woman, I can't remember her name, I'll leave it in the lower third, but she's played by Jada Pinkett Smith. And whenever it was brought up, I just really didn't care all that much about it. There's more leanings into the whole Neo as the one thing and people worshipping him and all, and I'm not sure how to feel about that. I guess I'll have to watch Revolutions in order to understand that. And while we're in Zion, there is a scene after Morpheus gives a pretty good speech. There's a massive rave that happens where people are just dancing, and it went on so long. I actually fast-forwarded through the thing, thinking, oh, this can't last. It's still going. I never fast-forward in movies, but I fast-forwarded here, because it was just like, I don't care about these people dancing, let's just get to something interesting already. And when the movie introduces something that's legitimately fascinating, like the architect, it's just kinda there and never really explained. I was kind of wanting that the movie would just be focused on finding the Oracle and then the Oracle telling Neo to find the architect. If the movie had just been focused on that, I think it would have been better. But instead, there's just a lot of distractions. Like, when the movie hits Zion, the pacing, hits a brick wall. Agent Smith is in here as well, and it's Hugo Weaving, so of course he's going to play this role really well. And I guess my overall feelings on the movie, like I said, it's a mixed bag. But in terms of the bad stuff, it's that there's a feeling of throwing things at the wall to see what sticks, and not a lot of it does. Now, I say this having never seen Revolutions, so maybe a lot of these will be resolved in Revolutions. I haven't seen it, but the point I'm trying to get at is that there's a lot of meat left on the bones, and I think the movie was meant to be longer to try and explore it. However, it just never happened. And at the end of the day, like I said, The Matrix Reloaded is definitely a mixed bag. There is some definitely noticeably not great stuff, but when this movie hits, it hits. It really nails the Matrix spirit. But those are my thoughts on The Matrix Reloaded. Brevin, back to you.
So like I said before, this film is a mixed bag. So for positives, I want to go over my positives first. The cast do a really good job for the most part. Keanu Reeves is a badass as he always is as Neo. Carrie-Anne Moss as Trinity is great. And Laurence Fishburne is phenomenal as he always is as Morpheus. And when it comes to Hugo Weaving as Agent Smith, he is still a pretty good villain. He has always been one of my favorite villains in film. And as for the action sequences, they're still pretty good for the most part. Some of the action holds up pretty well. The Shanto sword fight, in particular, I really like. It's mostly it's mostly in camera for the most part, and the stunt work and the wire work, it makes it pretty entertaining. And I love Don Davis's score for this film. It's just as good as his score for the first film. As for the Burly Brawl, I hope I said that right. Which is, of course, the scene with Neo fighting multiple clones of Smith. The in-camera stuff, that holds up, but the CG stuff, they go a little bit too far because it makes it feel like I'm watching a cutscene from a video game, because that's what I'm looking at. The highway chase, I think, is really well done with Morpheus and Trinity trying to keep the Keepmaker safe from these twins who work with the Merovingian, who works as an acceptable type of villain for the Matrix. And, of course, I mean, not only do they have to deal with twins, they had to deal with multiple agents, which I think works as a pretty good, well-filmed and very well choreographed action sequence, and the visuals look pretty well done. Some of it holds up. Some of the CG in this movie, some of it holds up, and some of that really, really doesn't hold up. And another thing that I really like about this film is that we get to see Zion, which was only referenced in the first film. We actually get to see Zion, which makes it feel more satisfying that we actually get to see what this city looks like, because this was only referenced in the first film. I mean, that this is the last human city on Earth that's deep underground near the Earth's core. So it was great to see Zion. And another thing that I really like about this film is the scene where Neo encounters the architect, the creator of the Matrix, and the dialogue delivered in that moment is handled extremely well, and I think the actor delivers all of that superbly. And I like how he discusses various versions of the Matrix and how there has been many different versions of the One, because Neo as the One is an anomaly of the Matrix that keeps popping up and the machines can't get rid of. And everything about the discussion of choice, I think, was also really well handled. Like I said, the performances, the action, for the most part, and the in-camera action, for the most part, holds up pretty well. And I'm glad that we got to see Zion. And that's about where it ends for me in regards to positives. I keep talking about how the in-camera action holds up. Though, when it comes to the CG, they go a little bit too far with it, because you have actors that are computer generated and it looks so fake. Especially one good example is the scene where Neo is fighting a bunch of different Smith clones, and it gets to the point, like I said, where it looks like I'm watching a cutscene from a video game, and it just looks so bad. And there's a moment at the end of this sequence where Neo tosses one of the Smith clones and just throws him next to a whole bunch of Smith clones, and we can hear a bowling pin sound effect. It's just am I watching a Matrix movie or a Saturday morning cartoon? Just Jesus Christ. And there are moments where the film can get a little bit exposition heavy, to the point where it almost makes watching the film a bit boring, honestly. And it just really did not work for me. And yeah, and when it comes to that goddamn rave scene, it lasts for 5 minutes, and I agree with Ryan, and it just did not work for me. It just felt a little bit unnecessary. It's just, I know a lot of people back then wanted this film to be great and just as good as the first film, but having a Matrix sequel be just watchable, it's just not, it just doesn't feel right. But there are things to enjoy in The Matrix Reloaded, and that kind of makes it tolerable for me. When it comes to The Matrix Reloaded, I don't hate this film. There are things that I like in the film, but it's nowhere near as good as the first film, which I have always loved, because I do think that the first film is a masterpiece. But when it comes to the performances, the action, and that one scene with the architect, that makes it tolerable for me. But everything else just... I mean, they went too heavy with CG, as well as a few, like, exposition scenes. The exposition and the heavy dialogue, as well as its deep philosophical meanings, get really heavy in Revolutions, which I will talk about pretty soon. And then, of course, I'll be talking about Matrix Resurrections pretty soon, which I definitely can't wait to talk about. So, yeah. I don't hate The Matrix Reloaded, but it's acceptable to watch for me. So I'm going to give The Matrix Reloaded a B. So what did y'all think of The Matrix Reloaded? Let me know in the... So what did y'all think of The Matrix Reloaded? Let me know in the comments below, and pretty soon I'll have a video for The Matrix Revolutions pretty soon, and I will talk about The Matrix So what did y'all think of The Matrix Reloaded? Let me know in the comments below, and pretty soon I'll have a video for The Matrix Revolutions pretty soon, as well as The Matrix Resurrections, which I'm definitely looking forward to talking about. And I want to give a big thank you to Ryan for supporting me for this video. And guys, thank you so much as always for watching. I really appreciate your support. Looking forward to doing more videos really soon. And if you want my thoughts on old or new films, of course, you know where to find me.